I'm a librarian, profit administrator, and a poet. In my former life, I was a Scholastic Gold Key winner in 2011 for writing. And I just finished grad school, so I'm now a librarian. I've worn many hats in this lifetime that I'm living. So I think that'll be helpful for folks who are maybe more creative, thinking about branching out in other directions. That's something that we can get into this evening. I am so lucky this evening to be joined by some incredible panelists. And I think we'll hop right in with a round of introductions. Sasha, do you want to say hi and just tell us your name, your current job and affiliation, and a brief description of your current creative practice?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled by all these emojis floating up over our screen. This is really fun to see. So know that we're seeing you even if we're not seeing all your faces. My name is Sasha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a full-time lecturer at Johns Hopkins University and a practicing fiber artist. My background is originally in drawing, got my bachelor's in fine arts in drawing from MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, and my MFA from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, in craft and material studies. I was a resident artist at Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts. My current creative practice, I do a lot of bobbin lace and weaving. I just had a piece at the Baltimore Museum of Art, which was a really exciting professional milestone for me. And in my personal practice, I make work about pop culture, specifically The Bachelor and reality television and Love is Blind, and comparing it to modern
Oh,
mythological structures. So happy to be here.
thank you, Sasha. Congratulations on your exhibition at the BMA. And you are a woman after my own heart as a member of Bachelor Nation. So I'm excited to
Yes.
learn more about your work. Terry, let's get a brief introduction from you. Again, just your name, your current job, and a brief description of your creative practice.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. Name is Thierry Kehou. I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships at Poets and Writers. I'm a writer and literary translator. I translate from the French. Had my first translation come out last year, A Sun to Be Sown with Other Press, published last year. And also currently right now working on a novel and an adaptation for stage of a novella that I translated from the French. So that's kind of my current creative practice. I have an MFA from Rutgers University in Newark. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Exciting to hear about how translation takes so many forms in your practice, not only between languages, but between genres. Exciting to hear that you're working on the stage. Congratulations. All right. Tiffany, if you could give us your name, your current job, and a brief description of your current creative practice.
Hello, folks. It's good to see you in emoji spirit. My name is Tiffany Lee. I use pronouns she, her, or they, them, either works. I'm an associate creative director, which means I work in advertising. So I am on the commercial side. I'm technically on the copywriting track, and this is something I can talk about later, but you can go into visual arts or writing in advertising. I actually started off as a journalist in the music industry. So I got to write for LA Weekly, a spinoff for Rolling Stone. I used to cover a lot of punk bands, indie, and then randomly they put me on K-pop before it was a thing. So I got to see a lot of really cool 15 years ago. Yeah, I went to UCLA. I was a double major English and art for the longest time because I was really torn between both disciplines. Eventually that became English and art history, and then I just graduated with an English degree. In my current practice in advertising, it's creative all day, every day, but it's also, because it's commercial, it's very business centric as well, which is an interesting muscle to flex. And in my personal practice, I'm always writing other things. Would love to write a screenplay one day.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's great to hear. I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of kind of being torn between the more creative and strategic sides of yourself, particularly when you go into undergrad and you kind of have to make that choice about what your major is going to be, and it feels really consequential. So I think we'll circle back to that, and thanks for sharing. Last but not least, Kim, tell us your name, your current job affiliation, and a brief description of your creative practice.
Okay, I'm Kim Turrisi. I am the Director of Programming and Events for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So by day, I create events and work with editors, agents, and authors, illustrators, and translators to try to help move writers, illustrators, and translators into their publishing journey. I'm a young adult author. I work all during the day, and I'm always writing down like ideas, because any writer knows that they just come to you. So I walk around with little notebooks all the time to do that. And I've written screenplays in the past. I just wrote a screenplay based on my first book that is going into production. And I've written a web series. So, ask anything you want.
Great. We'll definitely be leveraging that brain, Kim. Thank you so much for that intro. All right, so we're going to hop right in. I divvied up the questions among panelists so we cover a little bit more ground. So this first question is geared towards Sasha and Terry, and it's, how and where do you look for opportunities to promote your work? Just in a very practical sense. And what strategies have proved the most fruitful for you? And if you're looking for that next platform or an opportunity to share your work with the world, how do you get started?
One of the best tips that I ever got when I was first looking for opportunities for my work is to look at someone whose career you admire and look at their CV and look like 10 years back in time. And that those are like, you shouldn't be looking at what they're doing right now, because, that's 10 years or 15 years, 20 years in the future. But look at what they were doing right out of high school. Look at the things and the opportunities and the awards that they were winning. And a lot of really generous people leave that kind of stuff on their resume and on their website. And it's a really, really helpful resource. And it's showing you exactly kind of a roadmap to follow.
Wow, hot tip. I'm going to take that one away myself. Terry, did you have anything you wanted to add about how and where strategies, how to find that next opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've learned so much of publishing and sort of the literary world it's all relational. It's all about relationships. And so, I recommend just as much as possible, just showing up in person and meeting people. Like, who are the people that you want to meet? What are the publications you want to publish for? Are they doing an event? Attend that event. Who are the people you want to meet? Go to their readings. I think a lot of the opportunities that I've gotten in publishing have just been because I met someone who knew someone, and it's all sort of word of mouth and relational. So I think as much as possible, we call it being a good literary citizen, but just show up for your fellow writers, support them. And that usually, at least in my experience, has turned into something very positive for me. Either it's a reading for myself or an opportunity to publish something, or nothing is materialized yet, but you just, you never know what that's going to lead to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. I think something I've found a lot in my own career is I often underestimate the power of the ask. There's so many opportunities I've gotten just by asking, by cold emailing someone or picking up the phone and going to the website and calling the number and saying, "Hey, I'm Delali, you don't know me," but it's shocking how often I think that works out. So I think you're right. Just that putting yourself out there and getting to know people is a huge benefit, building up that community. It's really great insight. All right, Tiffany and Kim, I'm going to tap you in on this next question, which is, in your own personal journeys, what is the most impactful professional development opportunity that you've ever participated in? And kind of tell us a little bit about how and when you arrived at that moment and that opportunity.
That's a very interesting question. For me, I think it's particularly in the advertising world, so much of it is cumulative. It's not really a linear journey. And when I first entered the industry, I had the assumption that it is, because you work from junior to mid-level to senior and then the creative director route. So it is linear in that sense, but it's really about first and foremost, the relationships that you forge in this industry, who you work with, what projects you're working on, what your footprint is on these projects. And so I think if I, interrogate that a little deeper, there was a project that was very meaningful to me in 2020 during COVID.
Mm.
So we were pitching Cigna at that time. So, we were going after their business. But because of what was happening, there were very honest conversations with the client about what can we do to help people,
Mm.
And that was a very enlightening moment because it was so lovely to see clients so with such conviction to help people and not sell a product or just push their brand out. And so, long story short, we ended up partnering up with pastors across America to tap into the African American community, which at that time was quite hesitant to kind of take Cigna up on, its resources. So we partnered up with Magic Johnson, who himself is a survivor of a pandemic. And so it was this lovely full circle moment. And that really felt fulfilling in a world that, it's very easy to be cynical in the commercial world, I think. But what I've never forgotten is that we do make an impact and we do have the opportunity to do so if we choose to see it that way.
Wow, thank you. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing, Tiffany. And Kim, an impactful professional development opportunity in your career path.
Well, one of the biggest things that happened to me when I was a debut author, you're out there and there's a million debut authors, there's a million writers, and trying to shine a light on your work is really difficult. But community, which is what everybody's talking about, is key. And my publisher sent me to ALA, which is the American Library Association. And it was a game changer for me because you get to sit with all these librarians who get to know your work, and then you get to meet with a community of other authors. And I know you were saying you never know unless you ask. I mean, I walked up to New York Times bestselling authors and I was like, hi, I'm Kim and I'm a debut author, and every single one of them is still in touch with me.
Wow.
Let me know how it goes. And then I went to what they call speed dating, which I was terrified. And they put you like at tables of librarians and you pitch your book. And it just shined a light on my book. And my book was about grief and suicide. So it was a hard subject to talk about, but these librarians, they were so embracing, and I would have never gotten their eyes or their ears had it not been for my publisher. And then it came full circle for me, because then after that, the SCBWI, where I work, had a booth, and I got to do the same for other authors. So I will say to everyone, ask. Without a community of authors, I would never have ever had the courage to even start a book. So
yeah, I think I'm hearing a lot about these full circle moments, of being a newbie searching for community and kind of looking for mentorship and opportunities, and then finding that path and then being in a position to kind of set that up for someone else. I think that's a theme that's kind of emerging. So yeah, again, that community piece seems like it's really strong. Moving on to our next question. This one is going to be for Terry and Tiffany. How do you assess what you need and which opportunities are right for you? And by that, I kind of mean, how do you take a step outside of the day-to-day of your practice and really ask yourself, what do I need to grow? What's going to help me thrive? What infrastructure exists out in the world to help me achieve my goals and where I want to go?
whoa.
Oh, Terry, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll give this a stab. Let's see, it's a good question as well. I think one of the luxuries, I think it's a luxury that I have, is in my 9 to 5, I'm sort of surrounded by other artists and writers and editors and agents and publicists because of the work I do. So I'm sort of constantly growing and sort of learning about craft, but also about the business of publishing, which I think is really important to learn about. And it's not something that is taught or discussed a lot or enough about, in MFA programs or in writing programs. But it's so important to understand that, I think, for growth. And that's really been helpful for me, just sort of having the luxury of being exposed to these individuals who work in publishing, to just learn more about what happens after the art, sort of, what happens when the art meets the rest of the world, and that whole process. So, yeah, that's really just sort of helped shaped what I think I need in terms of what I need to grow. And I think, I've learned a lot about social media, though I'm not big on social media, but just it is becoming an important tool. But I also realize that as an artist, I need that, the sort of the privacy, or the sort of time away from just like everyone, to just sort of to just be with my work. So I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm not so much on social media. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think really for me, it's just being in the publishing world, and sort of living in it, sort of as from a 9 to 5. Um, it's really just sort of helped me sort of assess what happens when, like, my art meets the world, and it can be terrifying, but there's also lots of opportunity to do really amazing things, especially when it comes to publicizing your work, and also just sort of being open and honest with yourself about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do when it comes to promoting your work,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of knowing those boundaries and those questions you don't want to answer. And that's been really helpful for me as I grow, I think, as an artist, sort of knowing, um, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, in terms of what I can do when my art meets the rest of the world.
Yeah, no, I think you definitely did answer the question. And I think you brought up something that I think is really important, which is understanding which parts of your work and your practice are for yourself, and which parts of your work and your practice are ready to kind of go out into the world, carving, dedicating that sacred space for you and the creative, and then really spending time there to get in touch with when you're ready to kind of open up to the rest of the world. And I think that's a really important part of the process, and one that often gets glazed over. I think people kind of, that's the step before the first step. So I think I'm really glad that you did highlight that. Tiffany, did you have thoughts to add?
Terry, like everything you said, I'm so aligned with. Very similar thoughts. I am also very fortunate to have a 9 to 5 career where, in the sense that I can be very active in my craft, not all day, because, so much of work is actually just work, but being a professional creative is very interesting, because whilst you are doing work on behalf of others, you are exercising all of those creative muscles. And this is that notion that you've touched upon, Delali, where it's like you're not creating work for yourself, but you are doing the work. So that is something that is challenging. And similar to Terry, I find that I just need to like stop and walk away. Advertising can be very demanding. It's not actually a 9 to 5. There are a lot of long nights, sometimes weekends, really depends on the project. So it requires passion. It requires like a desire to actually want to do the work. All that said, sometimes I just have to walk away from my desk and go on a walk. Like I walk to Prospect Park with my dog. I look at the trees. I listen to music. And it's in those moments that, I feel nourished. Like I think for me, the answer really is nourishment. All forms. So that could be rest, that could just be silence, that could be loudness through a concert, exuberance through art, etc. Reading. You're not a writer unless you read, right? So it could take shape, and it takes the form of many things for me. But that said, another key component, which Terry touched upon, is learning how to discern for yourself what's right for you, and perhaps not what's not right for you at the moment. Never say never, right? It took a long time for me to figure out how to say no at work. It's an extremely competitive field. historically the juniors just get pummeled. I would like to say it's changing a lot. There's a lot more grace in this industry. That said, it's still very rigorous. And it's really all about, like any creative discipline, it's about rigor and practice. And that's all cumulative, and that really becomes experience and creativity, right? Really honing your skills. But yeah, like I think it was probably mid-career for me where I finally gathered the confidence to say no to certain projects, and B, had a very good sense of what type of creative I am. The advertising world's it's not a monolith. There's so many different things that you could do. I myself work at the brand campaign level. So it's integrated work, which means I could be doing anything from a commercial for TV to something in the metaverse to an experiential thing. Like we put on a concert with Willow Smith once. That was random. That was my first concert that I put on it, and that was for Walmart. And so it's really fun and exciting in that sense. You never know what you're going to get hit with. But knowing what type of creative you are in this industry just requires not going through the motions, but just interacting with all these different types of creative briefs, teams, brands, etc. So yeah, at the end of the day, trust your instincts. I also want to mention that, particularly in the commercial world, I think everyone has their own personal line, we're in an industry where oftentimes we're creating work for big oil, big sugar, big milk, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's something you have to understand when you're walking into it, that there's always going to be this reality that you are engaging in commerce. It's not for just the good of it or for the sake of creativity. But all that said, I also don't want to scare anyone away. All my clients are very lovely, and at the end of the day, are humans that want to do good things, besides hitting their goals and etc. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you both brought up boundaries, because I think that is something that is really important as a creative person going out in the world, knowing what you're willing and able and what you really want to do. Because there are so many different opportunities and platforms out there, and they all have their own focus and intention and goals. And you have to have that sense of whether or not that's really in alignment with you and what you want and where you're going. So I definitely appreciate both of you bringing that up. Moving on, Kim and Sasha, I would love to hear from you. The question is, how do you know when to scale up? If you have worked with a manager or an agent or a career coach or anyone like that, how did you know it was time to stop doing it alone and reach out for help?
That's a good question. I think, as a young adult writer, you do all the work first. I would say I took all the classes and courses. I went to conferences. I reached out to other writers. Again, if you don't ask, like just to get like what, when is it time? When do you know that you're ready to go to the next level? And it's a lot of work, workshopping, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's your art and you're putting together a portfolio, or whether it's a picture book or, your book form, get into a critique group and do the work and do the research, get to know publishing. Because a lot of people say, oh, I just want to write a book, but there's so much more that goes into it. And when you get that book into good enough shape where you have people that you trust read it and say, you know what, I think it's ready for the next level, then you go shopping for an agent. And that's not an easy process. You just have to stick to it. And I probably had, I don't know, probably 40 no's before I got a yes. And it's just, you just have to know that it's a matter of someone's taste. It's not your work. Your work is good. It's just a matter of who thinks they can take your book, shape your book, sell your book, because it's a business. To you as an artist, it's your heart and soul. But when you go to the next level, it's a business. And what you want when you scale up and level up is you want somebody that's going to share your journey, somebody that shares your passion for the work that you do. And that's how you know what agent is right for you. And then together you take your book and take it to publishing houses, and find the editor who's as passionate as you are. I think that when you're in this industry, if you don't go the self-publishing route, you have to scale up right away. You have to get an agent in your corner. You should have somebody representing you in your work, because they're the bad guy, first of all. When the publisher says, oh, I want you to do this, and you say, I'm not sacrificing my art for this ridiculous thing, you let somebody else be the bad guy. And the same way when they're negotiating your contract, let them get into the thick of things about the money of it all. So when you're going to go the route of traditional publishing, I would always recommend working to get an agent first. And again, your community will help you. They will help you get in the door, because there's so many people trying to do this. If you know any one person who's willing to help, I'm always willing to help young writers, because they need help. I needed help. And I took help from people. So don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to hear not only don't be afraid to ask, but don't be afraid to receive, because I think that's kind of the other side of that again often doesn't get talked about, but is important, being able to receive the help when it is offered.
Yes, for sure.
And again, talking about sacred space and boundaries, there are things that your agent is going to get into that you don't even want to know about. You want to focus on your edits
and the boundaries, even with the editing process, when it's a book that's really close to your heart, where you're not willing to give. And it's okay, it's okay to say, you know what, I just disagree, to find your voice in publishing. And when you're sharing your art, I'm sure it's with anything that you do, whether it's, if you're a painter, if you're anything that's artistic, there's a line that you're willing to go to, and a line you just can't. You just have to say no, and not to be afraid, because it's at the end of the day, your name's on it and it's yours.
Yeah, thank you. Sasha, how do you know when to scale up?
I think I'm fascinated by this conversation around writing, because it's kind of two sides of the same coin, but they're very different little universes and very different little niches. And the fine art world especially, I think, is changing a lot. And I think the concept of an agent and working specifically with a gallery was the only path for a really long time. And I think that's changing a lot. And I don't mean to speak for the writers of the world, but I think it's also shifting a little bit in that space as well, that there are many different paths to finding your audience and finding a platform. In that I have not worked with an agent. I have started to find galleries and spaces that resonate with me and my work, and show work similar to mine, that, it starts off small. They curate you into a group show, and because you've shown up quite a few times and you get to know the folks who work there. And then they maybe pull you in and you're in a small group show, and it's a larger body of your work with 2 or 3 other people. And then they reach out to you and maybe they want to host you for a solo show, and it's this building relationship. And it's, again, the same stuff that we're all talking about with this community, and showing up and being kind and receptive to people, because people want to help you, but they also have their own agendas and their own goals. And if you can identify how your goals align with their goals, rising tide lifts all ships. Everybody gets where they're going at the end of the day. And I think looking around at your peers who are also doing the great things that you're excited about. A couple years ago when I was applying for opportunities, you reach this roadblock sometimes where you need letters of recommendation. And I looked around and I was like, I can ask my friends for letters of recommendation. They are doing cool things. We are doing cool things. We met at a residency together. They can lift me up. I can lift them up. And together we can dismantle this hierarchical structure a little bit together. And in that way, you're kind of all scaling up together. And it becomes less about getting ahead and more about everyone moving towards a common shared goal. Because that's the only times I feel kind of the stickiness of this as a business is the couple times I've gone to like a networking event and been like, I want this from you. And it's such a transparent feeling. It feels gross for me. It feels gross for the person that I'm just like trying to schmooze. And it's so much more organic and so much actually more productive if I go into this being like, you're doing really cool things that I want to learn about and I want to be a part of. Do you want to be a part of the really cool things that I'm doing? And we can grow together in that way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I feel like that idea of keeping it organic is really important. And I think it's hard to remember as well that, you know, artistic movements and moments only become so after the fact, you know, when they're contextualizing in hindsight. I feel like I've had that moment so many times of being like, wow, it's crazy that these three artists were friends when they're all so famous. And it's like, well, they met in college and they were best friends, you know, and they all just made art because that's what they did. That's how they knew each other. So it's hard to remember that in the moment, but you're not going to know, you know, until much later in life what the moment you're in is. So yeah, I think that's really important. Seeking what feels good, what feels natural as an extension of your already existing life and practice. Thank you. So I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions before we open it up to the Q&A. We will be taking questions from the crowd. So if you have some, you can drop them in the Q&A there. I see it's blowing up right now, so I'm excited to check it out. Let's go into this one, which is open to anyone. Maybe you can raise your hand if you want to speak. Rejection. I'm going to bring up the R word. Rejection is inevitable. So how do you build resilience against the no's and hold on to hope for the yeses?
Well, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding when I say like the first time I got my first rejection, it was literally curled up in a ball in tears and just like, why am I a writer? I'm terrible. They hated it, even though that's not what it said. It just said it wasn't for me. And then as you keep getting them, a writer said to me once, who I really respect, you know what? If you look at all the times that people say yes to you and say all these good things about you and you believe them, you have to know that not everybody's going to gravitate towards the same books or the same art or the same. You do your own thing, and eventually, with a lot of tears and puppy videos and walks and a kind circle of my inner circle of friends that were always there that are other writers. And just to know that somebody who's on the New York Times bestseller list still gets no's, it makes you feel a little bit better. And or they get rejected. And the truth is, with art, you know, I think a lot of times you get rejected more than you get the positive, you know, feedback. And you just have to grow a thick skin. And it's hard. It's really hard. And I would say I'll go right back to community. It's the community that you can go back to, your critique group, your peers, the people that work alongside of you. They will lift you up. And if you aren't in a group that lifts you up, get out of that group. Everybody's goal should be the same, and that's to lift each other up. My whole critique group is finally all published, and everybody shared everybody else's joy. It was like sheer joy to hear when somebody, you know, was going to get published, however they were going to get published, whether it was traditional publishing, self-publishing. There's so many different ways to get your work out there, but surround yourself with people that when you get rejected are going to lift you up. Because you know, you have to do that. Otherwise, like I said, get a new group.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Excellent advice. Anyone else want to speak to rejection and how to build resilience against it?
I'd love to jump in a little bit because I totally agree, Kim. And I think one of the most eye-opening experiences for me was being on the other side of a application structure and doing the reviewing, or even just being a fly on the wall of the reviewing, and how insanely arbitrary it can be in the arts. That I was up for an opportunity, or I was in the opportunity, and I was a fly on the wall as they were evaluating someone to join the opportunity. And I'm a weaver. And the other person, one of the applicants was a weaver. And the person on the panel went, "We don't need two of you," and just rejected the other weaver. Cold, like just straight off.
Hmm.
And wonderful work. I know them personally now, and our worlds are small, and so we've interacted, and they would have been great at that opportunity, but it was just this like, well, we don't have two looms, so nope. And like that was just the end of that story. And, you know, had they applied again the next year, they probably would have gotten it, because it was just a space and arbitrary reality of that rejection. But you don't know that. It's such a black box that whenever you have the opportunity to get feedback on an application, sometimes organizations, especially nonprofits who know this struggle, will speak to it. And it's also just the ebb and the flow of it. Sometimes, you know, you can't be everything for everybody. And sometimes what you're doing and what you're making is speaking to the zeitgeist, and sometimes it's not. About 2 years ago, I was applying to everything and I couldn't get into like the really, you know, I was applying to juried shows of hundreds and hundreds of people and I couldn't get a bite. I was paying application fee after application fee and couldn't get anybody to even give me the time of day. And then, you know, a year later, someone's offering me a solo show. And it just, you know, it's if I spent my time trying to rationalize that, I'd go crazy. And it's hard to see the time when you're in the middle of the rejection, it's hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel where it's not going to happen, and you just have to kind of keep plugging away. I had a friend who made it a goal to get 100 no's, and or maybe to complete 100 applications, and she made a spreadsheet and she just plugged away and did 100 of them. And you know, her response, the proportions of it, the percentages didn't really change. She was still getting, you know, she was getting 1 out of every 5 opportunities. She was still getting 1 out of every 5, but that was 25 opportunities out of, or 20 opportunities out of 100. I can do math.
Yeah.
But so, you know, your odds go up the more you keep plugging away. And if you make getting the no's a goal, it kind of takes the sting out of it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can relate to that. I went through a phase in my own life where I had not been writing super consistently for the first time in a very long time. And I decided I wanted to kind of get back out there and see what opportunities were out there, try to get published or try to get a residency. And I was like, I have no idea where to start. So I was like, I'm just going to go full chaos method and just apply to anything that I see that sounds even remotely interesting to me. And, you know, I was sending out so many applications that for months I was getting rejected from opportunities every single day. And it's like, by the time you get to the 3rd week of that, you're just like, whatever, you know, it just rolls off your back because there's always more. And the opportunities that I did get were incredible and super impactful in my career. And they were the right opportunities for me, which is why it aligned, you know. But I think it can be really helpful to kind of expose yourself to the reality of the rejection. You know, if you let it wash over you, it really kind of takes the sting out. So I think facing the fear can be really, really helpful.
The
Other,
best feeling is when you've applied to so many that you get a rejection that you forgot you even applied to.
oh yeah,
And something comes through and you're like, oh, I didn't get that. And I completely forgot I even wanted that in the first place. And it
like
just,
I've never heard of this journal. I didn't even know it existed. Yes, definitely. Do we have any other thoughts on rejection? Otherwise, we can move on to one last question.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just echoing what I'm hearing here. Make rejection your friend. And it's hard to say because it's a visceral feeling. It's an emotional feeling. The younger creators that I work with, I recognize what they're going through, the disappointment. I jokingly call it the 9 stages of grief because it really does feel that way. I mean, 95% of your work as a creative in advertising is going to get canned. Someone's going to say no. Hopefully people are very judicious about it and always bring it back to the creative brief. Sometimes it's just a matter of taste. You just never know. But that 5% that gets through, it feels there's something fulfilling about that. But yeah, I think it took me a while to understand that there was a message in rejection as well. It was like taking a step back to figure out, okay, why didn't this idea work, you know, or what could I do to defend my work next time? That's also a skill. So yeah, you know, the sooner you, like everyone's saying here, the sooner you just jump in the pool and make friends with rejection, it just feels like a new instinct for you, and it won't hurt anymore. I can say with clarity right now, rejection does not hurt anymore. Sometimes it might be disappointing, but I don't get that feeling of like, I don't want to cry. I don't want to curl up into a ball. I don't think the
Sure.
world is okay. Terry?
That's what happens after it beats you over the head enough. You just have to let it go. You just, you expect it to happen and just keep moving on.
Yeah, I guess I just want to add in terms in about moving on. I mean, I think for me, rejection has just really helped me move on. Like, I think it's it's that propeller. I think every piece of art just there's sort of rejection sort of baked into it. Like there's nothing that exists out there that has not at some point in the process like been exposed to some form of rejection. So it's an art is subjective. It's when someone says no to something, whether it's an application for residency or MFA program or something you submitted for a magazine, it's not personal. It's about the work at that point in time. And so oftentimes for me, that just it's meant an opportunity to go to my community and just say, like, what's wrong here? It's an opportunity to revise. And I think revision is a great thing when it comes to it's an important part of the process when it comes to producing literary work. So yeah, I'd say just enjoy it, celebrate rejection. Why not? We should celebrate rejection. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all built that relationship with it at this point in our lives. And I think it's an important, even if it's a painful step to go through, an important step to go through. I think I'm going to switch over to some questions that are coming in through the Q&A now because we have so many great ones. I'm going to start with someone who asked, any tips for having a creative career alongside another professional career? Does anyone want to pick up on that piece, finding the balance between having a creative career and also another professional career?
I think all of us here do that. It's not easy. But the way that I do it is it's boundaries with work and also saying no to things so that I carve out my creative time and I cherish it. Sometimes it's outside. It might be at a beach with just a notebook. Other times I'm in my office with my computer. Other times I'm on a walk and I talk into my phone. But you absolutely have to insist on the balance, and it's a hard balance, and also throw in some self-care. So I mean, there's things that I do that I just say, this is my time and it's going to be my creative time. And whether I'm writing actual words on the page or scribbling ideas or laying flat and listening to music while I think about my characters, I take that time and I do it weekends, nights, lunch hours. But I think it's really important. I don't think I could do my real work life if I didn't have that, my creative life. And I get to be really creative at my job as well. But yeah, you just have to carve out the time and insist on it.
Yeah, again, sacred space.
That's
Anyone
right.
else? Anyone else?
I think what's weird about my job in particular is like, it's very easy to fall into the trap of like, well, I'm creative at work. And there's that, and I can keep that separate. And then I'll have all this energy left over to write my manuscript at the end of the day, the hours that I have left. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that like creative energy is not infinite. Like you can't give it all to work. And I'm sure everyone here works hard. I'm sure everyone on this call is a hard worker. But that's the importance of boundaries. Like work is still work. It's still a job. It's a means to an end, even if you really love your career, and hopefully you do. But for creative spirits with a personal practice, like that's your North Star. Like that's your mission in life. That's why you are here on earth, right? So, you know, conserve your energy, like Kim said, self-care, like everyone else is saying here, boundaries. Me personally, if I write a line in a manifesto and I'm like, oh, that's really good, I'll just save it for myself. I won't give it to the client. I won't give it to work. It's like I've got a million ideas. Like I can save some for myself, right? So yeah, I would say be protective of your energy and your heart.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, you bring up an important part about finding generative information in that space between your creative and your professional career. I know as a writer who works in nonprofit spaces, which are so jargon heavy, I love that language. I love the language of being at work. I find it so deeply fascinating, and it's something that has definitely leached into my creative work as well. That was also very true when I was in school. Academic language is so deeply fascinating. So I think too, having fun, finding play kind of like in the tension between balancing those two sides of yourself and opening up a space of dialogue between the two, I find can be not only helpful just in terms of kind of like easing that sense of like, oh, am I spending my time exactly the way I want to be? But, there's good stuff that comes out of that, good work that comes out of that as well. Sasha, it looked like you were about to say something. No?
Just really agreeing. And I think I love the concept of creative energy not being infinite, and think about it like a muscle. It's something I teach art to undergrads, and I talk about it all the time, that it's, you got to stretch, you got to work it. And it's not infinite. And one of the most important steps, I think, in my creative professional journey was leaving a draining creative career where I was working as a studio assistant and I loved the work. It was fun work, but I would get home and be exhausted and didn't want to do, it's like a chef doesn't want to make a gourmet meal for their family at night after cooking all day for a restaurant, because you use up all that energy. And being okay with a job that maybe just pays the bills and doesn't necessarily creatively fulfill you at first, if your creativity is fulfilling you on the side, and finding a way to slowly tip those scales in one direction or the other. That, I waitressed for years, and I, worked odd jobs, and I worked administrative gigs, and, filled out spreadsheets while weaving and doing bobbin lace on the side, until academia weirdly lets you calls your creative pursuits part of your academic work, and then you put that all on a resume, and that's a whole other weird universe. But being okay with the fact that you're the thing that puts a roof over your head does not need to be the be all and end all of your creative passions, and that none of those choices are forever, and those scales can tip in one direction or the other throughout time.
Great. Thank you so much. Did we have more thoughts? Any closing thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I guess I'll add it. I guess this is probably advice I'd give my younger self. But finding a workspace that can potentially be supportive of the work that you do outside of work. So whether that's the place like has a flexible enough schedule where maybe you might be able to work a 3 or 4 day work week. Do they have sabbaticals? Do they have summers off? But also just letting your colleagues and your supervisor just kind of know about this other thing that you do, not really on the side, but almost kind of alongside, so that you can, you might be able to just find some support there. Like, I think it's, in an ideal sort of workspace, that would be sort of not encouraged, but just supported, like just to know that someone has this other thing that they're really passionate about. And how can I, as an employer, like support this other thing that my employee does? So, definitely just being transparent about it. And if they can help support that, then I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of secret artists working in a lot of different organizations who will be surprisingly supportive and perhaps a little jealous of your bravery of wanting to straddle both worlds. So I think being open and transparent can be really helpful as well. Moving on to another question. I'm seeing quite a few questions in the Q&A about the role of social media in terms of getting promotion for your work, having a public profile, or being part of community. I'd be curious to hear about what role social media plays, if any, in your current careers, and ways in which you think it's been helpful or harmful to your growth and your development. I can kick us off as a writer who has never been on Twitter, or now X, which I think is, very against the grain. All the writers are on Twitter and I never have been. I think for me, social media is something that I've always wanted to keep a little bit separate from my creative career. It's always been just a way for me to stay in touch with family and with friends. There's something about that self-promotion and crossing those streams that's always felt a little strange to me. I'm like, I'll save it for my LinkedIn type of energy. So for myself, I know it's not something that I've particularly engaged in, although it is a way that I found a lot of amazing writers that I really admire and started to follow their careers. And I think it is incredible to have that ability just to, in a couple clicks, send a DM to someone and say, hey, I read this poem and I loved it. Going back to that power of the ask, and being able to build community, I think that's definitely there. So it's interesting. I guess it's lopsided for me. It's not something I've ever really wanted to do in my own career, but I really appreciate the opportunity to reach out to others who are doing that with their career. But yeah, curious to hear more about social media in your lives.
Tiffany, you go ahead, you start.
Well, I feel similarly. I was never on Twitter. I think I turned it on once because when I was writing for LA Weekly, I just had it automatically push out, and I was like, this is as far as I'll go. I've always had an Instagram, but it's private and it's really just to keep up with friends. Like, I too have like a bit of an aversion to selling myself through social media beyond LinkedIn. However, one important thing to keep in mind is that in this field, as a creative, you're essentially judged by your portfolio. Sometimes we call it your book, because literally people walked around with portfolios and showed them to agencies. Nowadays, it's all digital, of course. So everyone has a website. I put my energy into the website and I just park it, and it's like, cool, that's a representation of like what I can do. But I have seen a lot of creatives, like I admire so many artists and writers who do have a very curated, very interesting POV on social media. So I'm not against promotion on social media. Like I love it. I find so much inspiration there, but I think it's okay to not want to engage with it if you don't want to. It's not mandatory on your route to success, I would say. Some people find so much success through it and some people don't. So yeah, be careful with it as well. It's like I think social media can be such a nourishing, interesting tool for growth and for inspiration. But there are obvious downsides to it as well. And I think everything in moderation. You know, practically speaking, if you're trying to leave a calling card for your art, there are lots of different ways to do that as well.
I'm on it. I'm in it. I am on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm terrified of it, but I do it. I have trusted people in my life who I show things to before I post them, because I think an extra set of eyes is always really valuable. But I'm also there is so much opportunity and so many eyes that can get to your work. I also, because my work is so related to pop culture, I will make a piece about a star from The Bachelor and then tag them in it, and then they'll respond, which is like a really crazy whole universe. I've talked to bachelorettes and bachelors, and like it's this beautiful level playing field of communication. There's also some really famous TikTok bobbin lace folks that have really, if you haven't fallen into the TikTok bobbin lace corner of the universe, I highly recommend it. There are some great bobbin lace artists out there, and I've gotten to meet some of them, and the opportunities that like explode around them when you are lightly social media famous for an analog old school craft is pretty incredible. So I'm all for it, but I'm all for it in a cautious way. And I think that's going to change generationally, because of the different levels that we all relate to social media and the different ways that generations function on social media. TikTok terrifies me because I wasn't born into it, but someone who has a more fluency with that medium is going to be way less terrified. I post bobbin lace videos on TikTok and nothing happens in them and they get thousands of views and I don't know why. Um, it's just like bobbins and a Harry Styles song, but it works. And the algorithm likes it. And I find it a really productive way to meet other folks who are doing similar things. Every January, there's the Lace Challenge, where, you know, small niche communities really can find their voice on social media. And it can be a really great way for, you know, smaller galleries, smaller organizations to find your work and to promote your work in ways that are really accessible and shareable. So I'm here for it with caution, but I also love it. And when I was talk about the rejection conversation, when I was in grad school and was really nervous about a piece, I would take a really good photo of it, put it on Instagram, and then turn my phone off for critique. And then no matter what happened in the critique, I could turn it on and get like a nice little serotonin hit of all of the likes when I turned my phone back on. And it was a nice way to play with the two kinds of realities I was living in.
I love that. Game the system so the system doesn't game you. We're all gonna follow you on TikTok after this, Sasha, because I want to see the bobbins with the Harry Styles songs in the background.
Please do. It confuses me, but make me TikTok famous. I want it.
Terry, I know you said you're not a big social media fan. Did you have thoughts about this question or want to talk about kind of how you decided to abstain from that somewhat?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was never on Twitter or X, and I kind of got not forced into Instagram, but found my way to Instagram. But I think if you're not already on those platforms, there's a reason for it, and there's no need or sense into like trying to force yourself into joining and sort of this sort of popular trends. But I think there's something to be said also about obscurity, when it comes to art, and sort of not separating sort of the artist from the work and from sort of public eye. Not that it's that public, but yeah. So I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I mean, there are people who do it really well, and so I let those people do the work for me if there are opportunities for it. So just being, but I've always sort of been someone that's, a little bit more reserved, and I like obscurity. It works well for me. So keeps people guessing, and I think you can build momentum. I think through obscurity is just as easily, if not more effectively, sometimes.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Do we have any closing thoughts about social media and its role?
I just want to say I just got a million notifications on my phone that you all found me on Instagram. So that's very cute. Thank you guys.
It's happening live. It's happening live. That's amazing. Well, I think we are just about at the very end of our time. I want to thank everyone so much, our panelists, our wonderful panelists, for sharing their insights and leveraging their brains, as I said at the beginning to Kim, to really provide some strong practical advice to our audiences out here. I know I also myself learned a lot from the conversation, so it is much appreciated. I'm not sure if anyone has any links that they want to drop in the chat, anything that they want to say to sign off, but otherwise, thank you so much to all of our participants and our panelists. And we hope to see your work out there, exhibited, published, and out in the world for everyone to see. So thank you so much, everyone, and
Thank
have a
you.
good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.